The sleek new United States, America's bid for supremacy in the luxury liner class, tests her sea legs. Leaving Newport News, Virginia for Atlantic speed trials, the 52,000-ton, 990-foot craft is the largest and fastest ever built this side of the ocean.
Traditional brooms will go up if she beats the record both ways. We don't know what the Queen Elizabeth can do. She's never had a crack at the record, but there's no question of a battle of the Atlantic. Reports say that with the record won, the United States will settle down to the 30-knot service of the Queen's.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Ocean Liner Designs. Now, more than a few of you have emailed me about the news coming out of Philadelphia over the last week, and a lot of you are asking how I'm feeling about this. And to tell you the truth, here's how I'm feeling.
Not great, Bob.
I just have a resounding feeling of being bummed out, and I'm angry and I'm upset. I don't know who I'm angry and upset at, to be entirely honest with you. So this is going to be less of a educated, reasoned video. And to be entirely honest with you, this is really just a rant. Maybe this is how I cope. But here we go. I've seen a lot of commentary about the SS United States online. A lot of people arguing about how it should have been saved and what could have happened to it instead of the current plan. As of the time of recording this video, it's currently being towed out to Florida to be sunk in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to become a giant artificial reef. And the general consensus online is that that's a bad thing. I'm honestly less bummed out by the current plan as it sits. I think given the scenario and given the circumstances that were currently at play, the dynamic of actually what it would take to save such a ship and the fact that nobody was stepping up to do it, it seems that this is probably, almost the lesser of two evils, because just to get it straight out of the way, the United States being scrapped, broken apart bit by bit would have been pretty heartbreaking, possibly even more heartbreaking than seeing it sunk to become an artificial reef. That's up for debate. Possibly a scrapping is more a dignified end, but seeing her sunk and become an artificial reef means she's going to be around, technically, a lot longer. I would probably push back on claims that she's going to be accessible to the public, because what percentage of the public are actually qualified to go down and dive on wrecks like the United States? I don't know, but I'm going to assume it's very small. And I'm not among that group. So the idea has been that the county that she's being towed to in Florida will set up a museum with parts of the ship that you can walk through and look at. And that's a pretty cool thing. If they manage to pull that off and they make that happen, that would be great. But why are we here? How did we get to this point? The ship has been sitting there in Philly for as long as I've been alive. And one of the comments that's really been rubbing me the wrong way that I've been seeing online is people saying the ship has been gutted. There's no interiors, which is basically true. The interiors were stripped out. All the asbestos that was in there was taken out. We'll get back to why there is all that asbestos in a minute. But all of it was gutted, and the ship was left floating in at that wharf, at that dock in Philadelphia for years and years and years, waiting for a buyer or waiting for someone to step forward and help it out. And it began to look a little bit sad from the outside, and she kind of looks like a ghost ship. But some of the comments I've been seeing online in response to people saying, we need to preserve this history, we need to save this history, is people saying things like, what history? This ship didn't ever really do anything that impressive. She won a speed record, but what history? It's not the Queen Mary, it didn't carry troops. If you're of that opinion, that the United States is not historically important, then you're probably an idiot. And here's why. The SS United States comes from a time when the United States of America, its namesake nation, was really one-upping itself again and again after a series of huge successes. Obviously, with the conclusion of the Second World War, the United States was riding a huge high and it really had become one of the world's first true industrialized superpowers directly after Great Britain, which was then falling into ultimate decline through the latter part of the 20th century. For years and years and years and decades, the winner of the Blue Ribbon had come from Europe or Great Britain. The last time an American ship had won the speed record for a transatlantic crossing was in 1854. So that was before Lincoln's presidency. America had, after the 1850s, not really got too heavily involved in competing for the speed crossing records because they just had other priorities. You know, they were building a pretty impressive merchant marine of moderate-sized ships that could do all kinds of things, really like Swiss Army knife ships. And some really beautiful liners came out of this, you know, the next 60, 70, 80 years of American maritime history. But the speed record wasn't really on the radar until the Second World War, when the need for speedy troop ships came up. And so this is where the United States, as a piece of important history for the country, really rears its head, because this is the absolute zenith of the United States as a nation, its global power, its global influence, and not only that, but its global standing as a leader in technology and culture. This is the 1950s now, and this is a time when Americans really felt like they could go anywhere and do anything. It was this unbridled era of optimism that was overshadowed in many ways by the Cold War and the existential threat of the nuclear bomb. But as far as technology goes and as far as reaching for the stars, Americans and America felt like they could do anything. And the United States is kind of proof of this, is proof of this almost pre-cynical modern age that we live in now, back when people really thought that anything was possible. And what came of it was a really spectacular ship that was the fastest ocean liner ever built since or before. 100 years after the Americans last won the Blue Ribbon, they did it again by smashing the record of what had previously been the record holder for decades. And they did it in exceptional style. I guess one of the reasons why I'm upset about this is because the story of the SS United States is intrinsically linked with that of its designer and builder, William Francis Gibbs, who we've talked about a lot on this channel. And the reason why we talk about him so much is because the guy really stands out in the world of design as a whole, not just maritime history, but you think about some of the great product and machinery designers of our times, you know, Rudolf Diesel, Eames, the names that come to mind make you think of their products, Dyson, you know, from the modern age. They make you think of truly iconic pieces of architectural machinery. And Gibbs has to come to mind as someone at the very tippy top of this spectacular group of designers and industrialists and dreamers, because Gibbs had lived and breathed the United States, not just for the years leading up to its construction, but from all the way back from childhood. Gibbs had actually trained as a lawyer, and he was at law school, but he was obsessed with drawing ships. He was obsessed with designing dreadnought battleships and ocean liners, and he'd do it in his spare time, and eventually he decided to become a naval architect instead. And he did it of his own volition because it was something he was passionate about, something he dreamt about. All of the kids and all of the young people in my Discord server spent hours making ships in Minecraft or drawing them by hand and sending them off for people for approval. Gibbs was one of them in an era when Discord didn't exist, Minecraft didn't exist. And as a young man, he eventually was able to hone his skills and become a very talented designer with his brother Frederick, and become a professional designer of ships. But in 1919, just after the First World War, he had in his head the idea for a large, very long, very thin greyhound ocean liner to win the Blue Ribbon for America. And he didn't get the chance to build it because no one was going to invest in it for a very, very long time. And finally, with the end of the Second World War, United States Lines and the government got together to finance such a ship, and they had exactly the guy in mind to design it, because Gibbs had been, for his whole career, designing all kinds of ships of different sizes, and he was an obsessive. There is no doubt. William Francis Gibbs was obsessed with the design of his ships. He became so terrified of fire at sea that he dedicated his time and efforts to make sure that there was no way that ships that he could design after the Morro Castle in 1934 could burn. So imagine what it must have felt like for this now middle-aged William Francis Gibbs to finally be given the opportunity to design the ship that he'd been dreaming of since he was a child, and then professionally since 1919, to finally be given the opportunity to make it. It's such a great story. The ship really stands as a kind of monument to this daring do, this great American pioneering designer who actually went out there, had a dream, and did it and got it done. It's such a great thing. And so to see it destroyed or to see it sunk because now it's been left abandoned for years because nobody was able to match his pioneering vision in our modern age is devastating. So when we ask, is the United States historical and is it worth saving? And people say no because the interiors have been gutted out of it. The truth is, the insides of the ship kind of really don't matter that much. And in fact, at the time, they weren't really the highlight of the ship in the first place. They weren't ornate and elegant in the traditional sense. They were cool and they were sexy in a kind of Mad Men mid-century way that was really typical for the time. But they weren't what was drawing people to the ship. What was drawing people to the ship was the fact that you could get across the Atlantic in just a long weekend instead of the better part of a week. Very impressive stuff. The ship itself is history. The structure of the ship, the way the hull was designed, all of the thought that William Francis and his team put into building it just so to make sure that its bow wave would be manageable, to make sure that its hull coefficient was just right, to make sure that it could, get every ounce of speed out of those huge engines and their propellers. And speaking of the propellers, the other reason the United States is really interesting, I think, is because it also kind of comes at this point in history where, times are changing. And for a big part of the American population who previously wouldn't have been able to work on such a project, suddenly there comes a pioneering female engineer, Elaine Kaplan, who leads the team designing the ship's propellers, the propellers that eventually will drive it on to win the speed record. So it's a huge part of American history. And anybody who says it isn't because the interiors have been ripped out of it, I just have to look at them and kind of shake my head. Like, what more do you want? What more would be considered historical? I would be so curious. I get a little bit of a sense of how people might have felt back in, was it 1963 that they were going to be taking down Penn Station? And there was a massive public, response to that this is heritage. This is the people's heritage. And it didn't matter because in the end it was pulled down. Here in Melbourne, we have heritage laws for buildings now, but in the 1960s and 70s, before then, Melbourne had really been one of the most beautiful cities in the world. We had unbelievable buildings because Melbourne, my hometown, by the way, was extremely rich from the gold rush that we'd had in the 1800s. And so these incredible buildings were put up. And Whelan's, the wrecking company, was working with developers, going from one to the next and just kind of knocking them down one after another in this sort of fervent orgy of destruction. And they knocked down some pretty spectacular buildings like the Federal Coffee Palace and put up in its place some, office block, right? Which really isn't doing much as far as culture and heritage of the city. And now we have laws protecting buildings. But the point is that in the 1960s, when Whelan's was going around, wrecking all these buildings, those buildings, many of them that had been built in the 1900s, were only 60 years old. And so they were just at the cusp of becoming truly historical. But it was only 60 years. It's when things get to the 70, 80, 90, 100 year mark that suddenly something flicks and people think, oh, that's important. We should save that. So here we are with a ship that was built in the early 1950s. The SS United States is just at the cusp of being what some people might consider, historical, just purely by virtue of its age. But it's not old enough to kind of excite maybe the public. It's not 100 years old, and maybe that's part of what's playing into why it's being not destroyed technically, but why it's being sunk, because it's been sitting there as long as I've been alive and nobody has sought to save it or sought to protect it, except for the efforts of the Conservancy that's been working to protect it. I know there's a lot of passionate people keen to see it saved. I told you at the start of this video, I'm angry, but I just don't know at who. I'm angry at the US government. I mean, I did the math, and if America's government in the last 30 years was able to find half of 1% of what they spent on foreign military aid in 2022, then the United States, the ship, would have not only been restored, but she could have been fully refurbished and installed on the US East Coast, in New York, in Chelsea. She could have been a floating residential tower or hotel or office block, or all of these things in Brooklyn, perhaps. Maybe there's a disused dock there that she could be put in. Anything like this. And there are some great examples in New York at the Chelsea Piers. And why didn't that happen to the United States? It's a bummer. I know economically it may not be super appealing to a lot of businesses. It's expensive to do these things. And, business dictates that there's always going to be there has to be a return. But how could the government, or how could, some kind of cultural heritage organization not have been able to contribute or offset some of that cost to make it a viable or attractive option? It just absolutely blows my mind. A friend of mine was telling me recently that in Germany, there's the concept of the machine as heritage. And I mean, that exact mindset should be applied here. This is not just a rusting pile of steel. This ship it's important. It really is important. It harkens back to, in many ways, kind of a more innocent time. I mean, this optimistic era where America was on top. Being a symbol of when America was on top, I would have thought that the current administration, who are extremely interested in harkening back to a time when America was great, would be very interested in not seeing a ship which carries the name of the country on its front bow plates in huge lettering, SS, United States, would not want to see that be sunk, if only for the symbolic what it means or what it might look like to the rest of the world. It just absolutely blows my mind. So yeah, I'm bummed out. I'm really bummed out. I think that when you think about it, she's only one of 2 blue ribbon winning ocean liners still in existence above the ocean surface. So now we'll only have one, the Queen Mary. And she's only one of a small handful of ocean liners that still exist and are available to see from the public. Yeah, frustration. Frustration is the general feeling. Again, this isn't well-reasoned. I'm just kind of ranting at the camera. I know a lot of you will feel the same way, but I guess a small childish part of me is maybe perversely excited to see an ocean liner be sunk. I guess that will be a pretty spectacular image if we have to salvage anything out of it. But what a missed opportunity. Don't you think? Like, what a spectacular thing this could have been. Moored in in Chelsea or something like that. I don't know. It's just sad. I just wonder what William Francis and his design team would think of it now if they were around. What it would look like to them to see her go like that. Weirdly, I think, honestly, the best chance or the best time frame for the SS United States survival was really when Mad Men, the TV show, came out. That was a global sensation, and the world was suddenly very interested in mid-century chic and design and dress and things like that. And it even sparked, fashion changes and things like that. And I feel like that was the golden opportunity for the ship to kind of get the recognition that she needed to stay afloat. So I'm disappointed. Disappointed no one came forward to help her out. Disappointed that the nation that she had been designed to serve has let her down. And disappointed that in this very, kind of grim, cynical world where we're becoming so disconnected and disassociated with things that are important and that matter, that we think, in many ways, many of us think that, attaching symbolic meaning to things is passé, that seeing something that is a very, very real and tangible representation of a different time when people didn't think like that, when people could get excited at watching a newsreel of, America's flagship winning the blue ribbon before they went to go and see a movie or before the reel started playing. That is, it's sad. it's sad. Things have changed. Things really have changed. So yeah, we're going to see an ocean liner sunk. And Okaloosa County in Florida, I'm sure they're going to do a great job setting up a museum. And we would love to help in any way that we can if they'd be interested in that. But until then, we're just going to have to feel a little bit sad. Concept renders for the museum that they've got planned show a funnel and part of the bridge and all these sort of bits and pieces that they're going to have to cut off the ship to install in the museum if that's the concept that they're going with, which could be cool, you know, because then I guess you will technically be able to walk the decks of the United States, but it will just be a very small part of it. So hopefully they do a nice, tasteful job. But until then, it is time to say goodbye to an old friend, to a pretty spectacular ship that did exactly what it was designed to do, cemented American supremacy at sea, and established a record that hasn't ever been beat. Since 1952, the United States has been the fastest ocean liner ever. She could do cracking exceptional speed, and it's all thanks to this passionate, pioneering design team that gave their all into designing their ultimate ship, and a great man who loved his ship so much. Tell you what, do yourself a favor, get a copy of A Man and His Ship. It's a pretty great read, and it does a lot to explain why this ship is interesting and why it's historical. If you're somebody who before watching this video was saying that this ship has no historical merit because it's been gutted and that it never did anything, read this and tell me that you still agree with that, because I can almost guarantee your opinion might be changed. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy if you're still able to, and I'll see you again.